Welcome back to Monster in My Closet, the podcast where we shine a light on the professional world's darker corners. I'm Anil Saxena, joined by my co-host, the founder of Medusas, Morgan Hunter. Each episode, we tackle the fears and faux pas that haunt our work lives, with insights, interviews, and a dash of humor, some stupid analogies, and probably swearing. So if you've ever felt like you're navigating a workplace labyrinth, a never-ending approval process, an evil hall of mirrors, or a constantly ending quarter, you're in the right place. Let's confront those monsters together. Are you ready? Let's begin. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Monster in My Closet, our first interview episode. So, Morgan, what are we doing here today?
We have done multiple episodes on resilience, and I'm very passionate about this topic. And you know what? Enough listening to Morgan and Anil talk all day long. We're bringing in the experts. So
Yes.
let's introduce our fine expert today.
Paul, why don't you introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about what you do and how we know each other?
Awesome. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to see you both and be talking to you both today. And so my name's Paul Thallner. I am CEO of High Peaks Group, which is an organizational change consultancy. But I'm also an author of a book called Reinventing Resilience, which I think is why you want to chat with me today.
Yay.
But I've known Anil for a long time and just recently met you, Morgan. But Anil and I worked together at an organization called Great Place to Work back in the day, where we were trying to help figure out how to make organizations really, truly excellent places for work, excellent places to work for all the people who went there every day to do great things, and got really interested in the science and data behind all that, and really admired Anil's leadership. And we stayed close this whole time.
Awesome. Well, we're super excited to have you here today because this is a very timely topic, right? This notion of resilience. Today, we're going to dive deep into what resilience looks like at both the individual and organizational levels. We're going to explore resilience that it isn't just about bouncing back, but about fostering collective strength and long-term adaptability. We're going to discuss how organizations can create resilience by looking at moments of crisis as opportunities for growth and innovation rather than just recovery. So we're going to highlight some of the tools, strategies, and mindsets that contribute to a resilient organizational culture with real-world examples and practical advice for all of you leaders and all of you people out there that are just listening, trying to survive another day of work. So, Paul, how do you define resilience at the organizational level, and how does that differ from personal resilience?
Yeah, so I define resilience as the courage and confidence to grow through challenges. And that's a little bit of a nuanced definition because what we're used to seeing in a lot of the popular coverage of people's stories is that a resilient person is one that's able to bounce back from something, which I think is true. That is definitely a definition of resilience. It sort of falls short of what the real value of getting knocked down and bouncing back really is, which is the growth and learning that happens in the process of getting back up. And I think that when we reframe the way we think about resilience, we can get more value out of the experience and really move ourselves into a different, better future place than simply just standing up and being exactly where we were when we got knocked down before. So I got interested in resilience, and we can talk a little bit about some of the stories that led me to writing a book. But during the pandemic, there was a lot of content out there about helping individuals become more resilient. And that was really needed at the time. Obviously, people were suffering. But there wasn't a lot of content about the organizations or the circumstances that people found themselves in that required them to be resilient. So I started thinking, well, why do we keep creating organizations that make people need to bounce back every day? And that doesn't seem like, I mean, we know what a good organization looks like. We know how to reduce stress at scale in workplaces, yet we don't. We keep creating organizations that really do stress people out. cause a lot of stress and health issues. There's a great book called Dying for a Paycheck by Jeffrey Pfeffer, who says basically that the workplace is the fifth leading cause of death in the United States. And workplace stress accounts for between 4 and 6% of total health costs in the United States. And if you know how much we all spend on healthcare, trillions of dollars, it's a lot. It's a lot that could be attributed to workplace stress. So that's why I'm passionate about it, and why I think we need to reinvent resilience, because I think we're thinking about it all wrong.
Awesome. What are the key traits of a resilient organization?
Well, I developed a whole model around this, but basically I studied a lot of organizations in doing the research for the book, and tried to understand a little bit about what makes them different. And what I've concluded was that there's a core, and I have a picture of my model, which I can just kind of flash up on the screen for those who are actually watching. You won't be able to see this, but it's proof that there's a model.
You can see it on YouTube.
Just freeze on that moment.
Yes.
But a resilient organization has two things at the core, and I call it staunch realism, which basically is a fancy way of saying awareness. So they have the ability to be clearly aware of the circumstances and the situation around them, and they're very honest about what's going on. They're not sugarcoating things. They're not running around with their hair on fire, screaming that the sky's falling. They tend to have a very balanced and objective perspective on what's really going on. They're very realistic in that regard. And then the second core aspect of a resilient organization is belief. And this, I call it collective efficacy, but it's really when everybody in the organization, they don't have to say it out loud, or they don't have to proclaim it or put posters up about it. There's just a belief that whatever we're struggling with, or whatever situation that we're facing right now, we will get through it, and we'll win. Like I always think of the Apollo mission, right? When these folks were in the room trying to figure out how to get the Apollo capsule, the oxygen it needed to keep the astronauts alive. The scientists there knew they were smart enough to do it, and they knew they were going to figure it out. It was just a matter of, would they do it before time. The signs of a resilient organization are ones where people actually just simply believe that they can do it, and there is no question. That's a little teaser for the rest of the model, but that's at its core what I believe signal a resilient organization.
It's really
How can leaders foster this within their organizations and within their teams?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways they can do this. I mean, they themselves as leaders have to lead, for one. And I think there's a lot of literature and advice and guidance out there on starting with self, and leaders understanding their own values and who they are as people, and making a commitment to lead somewhat compassionately, as compassionately as they can. So that's, I think, kind of a ticket to ride. Like, if you don't have that, it's kind of, there's no point doing much else. But so when leaders are in a place where they can be authentic and honest with their teams, I think that can put them on a course to stronger and more resilient organizations. I don't like using the word vulnerable, because people have a reaction to that. But I think generally, if a leader can be at least honest and saying, like, well, this is a big challenge. We've never encountered this before, but we've encountered hard things before, and we've gotten through them. Maybe not this exact thing, but we know we can do something. So let's, if the leader's giving them hope and belief, then I think that's a great start to fostering that on teams and throughout the rest of the organization.
That's really interesting, and it kind of makes me think of the notion of, as a leader, you have a responsibility to create an environment in which people can flourish, and not feel like they have to kill themselves in order to get noticed, or in order to do things better, or anything like that. So what are some things that you can kind of help leaders understand, or tactics that you think you could help them do to provide or create that kind of environment?
Well, I think they should definitely read the first chapter of my book. But I
Yes.
think
That up again.
yeah, that's
Say no.
reading.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about a couple of things that really do make a big difference, and it's really about reframing or rethinking how you think about problems and how you think about organizational challenges and things like that. So I think leaders need to reframe how they think. And first is this acknowledgement or kind of admission that the words they use create worlds, right? So there is this principle, I think, very commonly known in psychology and organizational psychology in particular, that the language that's used in an organization does have a profound effect across the entire organization, right? So
Mhm.
we know that reality is what we all decide it is, and leaders have outsized proportional effect on what people believe that reality to be. And the language they use is really important. So I think being really, really careful and intentional about the words leaders use is a really important one. The second is a belief or an acknowledgement that the questions you ask are fateful. So if
Hmm.
you like, there's all kinds of, again, more research, but the questions you ask send a person's brain or a team's energy in a specific direction, right? So if you ask a question, why are we falling so short on production, or why is turnover so high? You'll get a bunch of people focusing in on why turnover is high, right? And what are the sort of mechanical problems around turnover? But if you flip the question and say, like, what can we do to create a magnetic employment experience for people? It's a different question that sends people off in a different direction, a more positive, innovative direction. So how might we create like an absolutely fantastic magnetic culture that keeps people loving coming to work every day, right? Those are totally different frames of reference. But the question you ask is fateful, and you can be intentional about where you want to send people's energy. Another is a clear, this is widely known too, but a clear picture of the future, right? So we all know that images inspire action, and we want to give people some sense that what they're doing really does matter. So we have to
Yes,
put a
please.
picture out there, right? We have to put a very clear picture out there on the horizon for people to start walking towards. No one gives a shit about the next quarter as much as the boss, right? So I'm not like, I don't go to work every day saying like, how can I make the number for this quarter for my boss? Like I mean, you can do that. A lot of people feel that pressure, but it's not inspiring. But they want that vision of the future that their life actually is serving some slightly greater purpose, right? And then the
Maybe.
last,
Go ahead.
sorry, can I
Sorry.
do one more, Morgan? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, do
So,
it.
and the last is we get to choose what we ask questions about. And I think this is what leaders really need to, build up their discipline. Because I think sometimes leaders will just pop off with a question, or they'll have some reaction to some stimulus in the organization. They'll see a chart, they'll see some data, or they'll hear a rumor, and they'll just like start asking questions about it, not realizing that could potentially be disruptive. So choosing what you inquire about is just as important as how you inquire about it. So those are the four principles that I think leaders can really start thinking about and take to. Can I have one more? Can I ask one? There's five. And
Yes.
I
Yeah. I mean,
forgot to
listen,
turn the page
so
and
it's fun.
read the fifth one.
Yeah.
No.
Do the
I
fifth.
wrote about these. I should have them all memorized,
Yeah.
but it was 2 years ago.
These are a lot of
Um,
words, dude. I think
so
memorizing all those words, very hard.
There's so many words. There are a lot.
A
So
lot of,
the last one I think leaders can sort of think about and start reframing how they think about resilience is that positive questions lead to positive change, right? So I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier about how and why how we ask questions really does send people in a direction. But that's the last one, is that you know you there is something very psychological about what you put in other people's brains to think about. So if you put positive questions in there, you're not only giving people an opportunity to innovate, but you're also giving them purpose and hope.
This is so amazing. I'm seriously, that's like all these things that you're telling me. I'm like, yes, that. Because I worked at a place once where I had a manager who used the word maniacal a lot. And I feel like while that word is appropriate for true crime, it should not be showing up in corporate America.
Unless it's
Like,
actually maniacal, right? Like I think being
right.
really
He's like,
like just you can't just throw a word out like,
maniacal,
yeah,
the
unless
phrase
you
was
know for sure.
maniacal
Yeah.
customer success. And I'm like, I don't know what
Oh,
that
oh,
means, but
oh.
it feels
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Oh my
it
God,
just, like,
there's so much of that.
I don't think you know what that word means. I was just like, he does not know what that word means because that's bad.
I think it was probably just a paraphrase of some other like overly, uh, kind of uh, adrenaline addled slogan for
Yeah.
that a
Yeah.
lot of other companies do.
I
Yeah.
also really resonated with the honesty aspect of this and being realistic about what's happening, because as an employee it's really troubling to me when someone comes in, they're over rotating and being super positive about something that there's absolutely no way you could actually be positive about this because it fundamentally sucks, but somehow they're like lollipop land out there, blah blah blah, it's okay. I'm like, I feel like it's not okay and you're not recognizing what I'm going
Right.
through.
It's like, how are you not seeing this? Why can't be you're not my
Yeah,
boss?
and
Like,
so then I start to distrust leadership because I feel like they're
absolutely.
disconnected from what's going on, and then I start to panic, and everyone else starts to
Yeah.
panic.
It's like,
So I
are you
feel
even
like if you
trying?
just
Like,
honestly, without a lot of emotions, just say, "We're in a shitty situation
yeah,
here. We're
totally.
gonna get through it, right?"
It's important. I think it really is important. And so few leaders have the courage and confidence to do that, because it does
Mhm.
take a lot of, I mean, you're like, oh my God, my best people will leave. It's like they might. But if you've created a culture that people want to that they're interested in the overall success of the team or the organization or you as a leader, then they will, come back the next day and keep working to
Yeah.
make that happen. So you can't just simply be honest. You also have to have the backup of a strong culture, right? Like you need to like create the conditions where honesty will work.
Yeah. It
And
really
and
it feels like you need to create that foundation of trust
yeah,
before you can have those kind of honest conversations.
they lean on each other. I think you do both, right? Because you have to, one begets the other. Like trust is an outcome. It's not a tactic.
Right.
So I think if you can help, normalize this candor in an or kind of disclosure or transparency in an organization, and it just becomes kind of how you talk to each other, then it won't be a shock when you have to deliver the transparent bad news you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
um
And it does make me think about, and Morgan and I have a common experience about a phrase, words matter. And I guess we've learned in this conversation,
Words do matter.
actually
Words
words
matter.
matter.
Oh yeah.
And so I stand corrected that words matter. And the other thing that it makes me think about is, Daniel Kahneman did all of this work around bias, right? And the thing that you said about be careful about the questions that you ask and the framing of the question, it kind of makes me think of this notion of organizational anchor bias, right? So like, what are we, why is turnover so high? Why is production so slow? It anchors us in the negativity of the issue, and so you become kind of myopic in how
Right.
you're approaching things. And the other thing that you mentioned that I think is really brilliant is choosing what we ask questions about. I find a lot of times, and we've all had this common experience, that a senior leader comes into a room and they just kind of verbal vomit. And people are like, oh, shit, I got to do something about the thing that was said. But that thing was just like brain fart that the leader
Right.
had. They didn't really mean it.
Right.
And but people are off the like scurrying for what do I need to do to solve this problem that doesn't really exist. And do you feel like in your research and in the work that you're doing that leaders need to bring a level of intentionality around what they're saying, to kind of create that environment?
Yeah, of course. Like it's amazing to me how frequently we have to tell leaders that their voice matters and how impactful it truly is. I think uh, and I think I was going to speculate on maybe some of our more flatter and egalitarian structures are, creating more familiarity and looser kind of conversational structures and patterns where people don't, but there's always hierarchy, right? There's people will always look to the boss and will, like, no matter how cool and, whether there's beer on tap or not, they're still going to look at the boss and say, like, that person's, whatever they say matters, and we're going to listen. It's like, reminds me of the parable of the shepherd who found a crown in the field and put the crown on, and all of a sudden the sheep started treating the shepherd differently. Like, they were all scared of the sheep because they didn't know what would, like, look at the surge of power coming from this person. And they're, even though the shepherd was still just a shepherd trying to be normal, everybody looks at the sheep are looking at the shepherd differently. And that's exactly what happens to leaders. So a leader does not have the luxury of walking into a room and just, like, spouting off about whatever is on their mind. Like, that is massively disruptive. They owe it to the people who follow them to be clear, specific, and intentional whenever they're talking to their people. It's the burden of leadership that they must bear and have the responsibility to do well. Otherwise, it can send the organization in these weird ass spirals all the time.
Curious because I'm going to go ahead and raise my hand for the people listening. I'm raising my hand. I don't know that I've always done this well. What you're saying really resonates with me, and I'm thinking, yeah, that makes total sense. We should be doing that. But when I'm worn down by the machine, it is really hard to show up as your best self sometimes as a leader. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for our leaders who might themselves kind of be feeling rough, if there's an exercise or a grounding, something that they can do before they start messaging to their teams.
Besides cancel the meeting? No, I think leadership is a journey. It's not, you don't ever kind of land there and, it's not a stable place. You have to constantly work at it. And I think the best thing a leader can do is really understand what it is that gets them off their game. What are the so-called triggers that for sure are going to have you thinking about three things at once, or not being really present for your team, or maybe even a little gets you close to anger or resentment or irritation or whatever it is. Like, I think that's the work of a leader, is to really figure out and see those things coming as much as you possibly can. Like, for me, it's if I'm in a meeting and I get interrupted, I shut down, and it's because, like, we could go into the deep, historical, like, child stuff and parent shit and all that, but that is the reality of the situation. It almost doesn't matter, that psychological background, but it's like, if you're aware of it and you kind of, like, can, before a meeting, say, like, okay, I might get interrupted in this meeting. I probably should just, figure out how I want to deal with that today. It's like, I'm going to practice just keeping my hands on the table so I don't, like, reach for my weapon, or whatever. It depends on your workplace. Or just, like, go for the pills in the pocket or whatever it is that keeps you from losing your shit, right? Yes. But being aware of these things in advance really does help. And I think so. I think it's just like resilience, right? The minute the time to think about resilience is not when you get knocked down. It's like in the in-between period. That's when you should build it up. Same thing with leadership, right? The time to think about, oh, how do I do this is like, not as you're walking in the door or when you're sitting down in the meeting. You have to be working on it kind of regularly between those times, so that you can embed it into who you are and change your behavior that way.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because I think that it also helps to understand what norms you can kind of help to institute within your team to help everybody with those, right? Like raising your hand, or I don't know, whatever those things are, so that you can reduce the amount of being triggered, or you can just take it out on the one person who's being an asshole and not everybody. Because that's another sign of leadership in my head. Yeah. So as you're thinking about an organization, right? So we've been talking a little bit about individual teams, and one of the things that I think is really interesting about your approach to resilience is that it's not it's not just an individual's journey, right? I think so many times, as you said at the beginning, that we're called upon to kind of be resilient. That whole notion of pull yourself up by your bootstraps when you get knocked down. But somehow we've created these environments where we're constantly getting knocked down,
Absolutely.
and somehow the environments aren't at fault, which seems ludicrous to me. So, what's your kind of thought or advice about how can organizations lean in to create more intentionally resilient spaces?
Yeah, this is the passion of this work comes from this notion that, people are being asked to do a lot when they already have a lot to do. So we have like things going on in our lives outside of work that are hard, right?
Yeah.
We all have those things. And we also have hard work lives that are evolving constantly. There's just a ton of research that shows organizations need to be on a path of reinventing themselves every 3 to 5 years now because the pace of change is so fast that
Yeah.
you can no longer kind of milk a product or a service for a couple of decades while you kind of think
Mhm.
about what you want to do next. Like you have to do it almost continuously now, and that puts enormous strain on the individuals within that organization. So organizations have two choices. They can basically say, "Hey, look, that's just the way it is, and you need to like be tough," because that's just how our world is right now. It's like, okay, that is that what we want? Was that what we all want? Or, because if you go that direction, you're gonna have a lot of people living in vans doing content marketing, for blogs and shit, which we have a lot of. And then or the other choice is to say, okay, how can we make this organization succeed and get the results it needs to get with the people that are here in a way that doesn't cause them harm, that doesn't shorten their lives.
Mhm.
And I think that and the way to do that is really by focusing in on that discipline of building up the resilience in ways that I've already talked about, collective efficacy and staunch realism. I think those are the real core pieces, because when you have those things, you do build organizational level courage and confidence to address changes that are inevitable, right? I mean, we can predict some, but there's I think we know for sure. The only thing we know for sure is that something else is coming down the road, and it's going to be difficult. Like no one expected a pandemic. There's, all kinds of things going on in the world that are particularly challenging. But I think when it comes to the actual, concrete steps that leaders can take to build up that courage and confidence, it really comes from this, the kind of sources that I kind of lay out in the model. One is identify, just like taking time to understand what the organization's blockers or triggers are, right? Just how I don't like getting interrupted in meetings. That's a trigger for me. What's our pattern as an organization? Where do
Yeah.
we get stuck, right? When does the board or the executive team tend to react most strongly to news? And what
Mhm.
have been those patterns? Is it cost cutting? Is it rifts? Is it selling off part of the organization? Or what? Like, how do they, understand what triggers us so that you can see it coming and decide how you're going to respond in
Mhm.
advance? Another is, of course, understanding and accepting the situation, doing the work to really figure out the environment that you're in and the fact that it's changing so much all the time. I think, being, not that are false, really kind of being a student of the environment is a really important aspect that leaders need to take on to build organizational resilience. The other is accessing resources. This sounds like money. I don't mean money necessarily in this particular example, but if your organization, it has been around for some time, or any amount of time, something went right along the way to get you there. And no, I mean, organizations are so good at forgetting that that things have gone right. They never go back to learn from the incredible successes that they've had. What were we doing? What were we thinking? Who did we have? Why were we successful? What was it like here during those moments of peak performance? And how can we emulate that now? Right. So let's not just say like, well, we got to make this quarter or else we're doomed. It's like, well, wait a minute, we've done hard things before, right? So let's calm down. And then the next is being leaders can really take a strong, I think, helpful role in filtering down the future possibilities to ones that are both reasonable, rational, and doable. Because I think sometimes leaders or organizations either set a ridiculous target, like a ridiculous goal, like big, hairy, audacious goal. We want to be the Uber of, like, I don't know, pretzels. Like, what does that mean? Like, so, like, okay,
Makes me
but
hungry.
yeah, but really giving people a set of possibilities, or choosing, like when you're thinking about the organizational strategy, thinking about the possibilities that are reasonable and doable given the circumstances that the organization is in, and going after those, and not saying like, oh, you want to be ambitious, but you don't want to be so detached from reality that people don't believe it's possible.
I think that's really, really powerful. And it makes me think about, this notion of organizational resilience doesn't mean you have to go back to the way that things were, right? Morgan and I were having this conversation earlier this week about this kind of new trend towards return to office, right? As if that's going to respark something that occurred pre-pandemic, instead of really looking at, so now the new reality of work, how do we be successful in this new reality? It also makes me think about that whole thing about reinventing yourself every 3 to 5 years. I have this vision in my head of like a horse and buggy industry, and how, had we not intentionally done some reinvention, where would we be? Right. And
Absolutely.
it just gets faster and faster, but we're not putting the structures in place to scaffold or support being reinvented or looking at what's new. That's my contention, is that it
Right.
feels like we're asking people to work in the same way that they did, knowing that we're changing. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if ever there's a great case study there's probably 10 or 20 PhD students right now, I'm hoping, studying the effect of distributed work or remote work during the pandemic, and tracking those organizations that have stuck with it and those that are kind of going backwards to this 5-day week thing. And I really do, it kind of it kind of makes me wonder uh, which of the organizations are going to end up on the Fortune 500 list. I would love to place bets on that. Like there are the too big to fail organizations, right? Amazon's calling everybody back 5 days a week. They won't go anywhere for a while, right? It's not going to, and that won't be what kills them probably. But there are a lot of smaller organizations that are putting that into effect, where people do have choices, and they're going to be like, I could get a comparable job at a 3-day a week place or a fully remote place. So why would I subject myself to the added cost and time of commuting? So we have to
Yeah,
reinvent work.
commuting is real.
Commuting is the worst.
There's
I mean,
so many times where I'm like, oh, I'm spending 2 hours a day. Sometimes I was spending 4 hours a day
yeah,
on the road. And, when I looked at why is my life out of balance, it's like, because I'm literally sitting in my car for 4 hours.
a
And of
half
course,
day.
people will be like, well, you can take meetings in your car. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that. No,
No,
no, I
yeah.
know.
You can't take notes in your car. You can be on the phone,
yeah,
but like what?
I've left work, right? I've left work for the day, right?
I
I
don't
don't
want
want to
everybody
like send
knowing
that
I'm a
to you
terrible
and you
driver
and
that
you.
honks at all the people who cut me
Yeah,
off. Like, I don't want
exactly.
that.
yeah.
So it's
It's
crazy.
but I think it's an interesting conundrum, right? That as organizations, we need to be thoughtful in how we're understanding how people deal with a changing environment, and set up the structures in which to do that in a way that we're successful as an organization, right? Because that's important, but that our folks are successful as people to be able to contribute. And so they're not working 14 hours a day and then going home and kicking the dog or, punching
Right.
their neighbor, uh,
Yeah.
unless their neighbor's an asshole. Then
Some
that
neighbors
might be
deserve it.
acceptable. Um,
I think too that sometimes leaders feel like that their experience and their needs
hmm,
represent the experience and the needs of everyone in their company. So I'll use this as an example. The pandemic messed people up in terms of having to work from home, and people really struggle with that.
Mhm.
I was doing the happy dance. I was so happy. I had no requirement to travel, to leave my home, to talk to my coworkers in the like idle chit chat in the hallways. I was perfectly good with that. And I felt like this is the most productive I've ever been in my life. So I think that, I would say to leaders, your experience isn't everyone's experience, and maybe some people will work best remotely and not in the office.
It reminds me of a really interesting idea I learned from some folks who do professional facilitation, and they talk about this idea that the notion of leadership has changed over the years, over the decades, where back in the day, or I don't know how long ago that was, or it may still be the case. Today still may be the day. I don't know, but a lot of leaders were the expectation was that leaders were the smart people and everybody else did the work, right? So anytime an answer needed to be generated, it had to come from a leader.
Mm-hmm.
So their role was simply to, make decisions, essentially, right? But I
Mm-hmm.
think as the new model of leadership, and I think what creates a more resilient organization where you taking advantage of the wisdom and intelligence and experience of the people who actually work there, leaders are there to ask questions now, or at least I believe that it would be much more beneficial if leaders took on a role of asking more questions to bring out the solutions or the innovations that reside in all of the employees. And wouldn't that be a great place to work every day, where people are asking you what you think, how you might solve this problem? How can, like, hey, I could use your advice. Like, can you imagine a boss coming up to you and say, hey, I could use your advice on something? It's like, damn, like that would be like, I'm sorry, what? You know,
yes.
are you
That would be a
like,
good day for
who's
me.
behind me? It's amazing, right? So I think if leaders take on a little bit more of that, where they're not feeling the pressure to have
Mm-hmm.
all the answers all the time, then you're going to create a workplace that is a lot better to go to on a daily basis. You'll feel seen and heard. You'll feel understood and respected, no matter where you are, whether you're at home or at the water cooler or whatever. I think that to me is a lot more important than the locality of the people, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
really, how can you create an organization that makes people feel seen, heard, valued, respected, that lowers all of the, inducing hormones and everything else and all the things that create health issues in workers, and it could obviously unlock a lot of potential in the organization.
That's amazing insight. And I think it really helps to solidify this notion of the power of a resilient organization and what that means to the success of an individual, and to the success of a team, and an organization. So, Paul, thank you for spending time with us today to talk about resilience. We would love to have you back to talk about other things, and hope that you're open to that. But before we kind of officially wrap up this conversation, so, in the theme of Monster in My Closet, we're curious about what is it that keeps you up at night, uh, in the work that you are doing.
I love the question. It's a challenging question for me because I really hate the fact that things keep me up at night. So I'm reacting to that idea of being so worried, especially as someone who talks about workplace stress. Why am I so stressed that I can't sleep? But it does happen. And I think the things that keep me up at night are the this idea that we know, like we know what to do. And most leaders are like normal, compassionate, nice people. If you talk to them, right? They want to do the right thing and they know the right thing to do. Yet we have this sort of shared belief, like sort of this social contract at work that basically says leaders have to be impersonal, inhuman, decision makers, can't be your friends, all this stuff. And I think that, and so like they are at odds with each other. People know what's really good for people in the organization, yet there's some belief that has gotten into our heads that we can't actually do those things. And I find that to me is troubling. It's what I think about all the time. It's perplexing. And I wish there was wish it was easy, but obviously change is hard. So I long for those days when we can create organizations that really do enable people to live longer as a result of going to work instead of shorter.
Love that. Love that. Totally open to having
now
more
that's going to keep me up at night. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I think what's going to keep me up at night is you said that's the ticket to ride, and now that song is playing in the back of my head. So,
She's got a ticket
right?
to ride. It's at
Yeah,
the Beatles, right?
I already. You don't have to sing it. I already have it.
Oh, sorry.
But I appreciate
For
that.
those of you at home who don't know the Beatles,
Yeah, I would Google them because
Google they're a band from England.
Yeah, pretty good. They're pretty good.
Yeah, they have a few hits.
Yeah. All right. Well,
pre-auto-tune.
Yeah, pre-auto-tune.
What's the name of your book one more time for our listeners?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's called Reinventing Resilience, available at fine bookstores and Amazon.
Awesome.
Go out there and buy it, people.
Please, yeah. And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Monster in My Closet. If you liked this episode, please make sure that you rate and review it. If you didn't like this episode, as I've said before, I'm not sure why you listened all the way to the end, but please take care of yourself. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. As we wrap up another episode here at Monster in My Closet, we want to thank you, our fearless listeners, for joining us on this journey of exploring what scares us or when we're scary. Professionally, of course. Together, we've ventured deep into the workplace wilderness armed with humor, insights, and a touch of irreverence, and hopefully learned something together along the way. But our journey doesn't end here. Monster in My Closet is proud to be part of Medusas.org. Medusas is a membership-driven, non-profit organization serving underrepresented groups, minorities, and individuals with disabilities who are doing business in the software-as-a-service space. We're a community created by SaaS professionals, for SaaS professionals, and even the SaaS curious. Visit Medusas.org to discover how you can contribute to a movement that empowers professionals to face their workplace monsters head-on. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your colleagues, and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us shine a light on the monsters lurking in the professional closet, making our community braver, stronger, and a little bit wiser. Until next time, keep challenging the status quo, embrace the journey, and remember, no monster is too big when we face it together. Cheers.